Omari Dorsey stood frozen in the lecture hall, as the room erupted in muffled laughter. His name had just been called to solve a calculus problem no PhD candidate had touched. But this wasn't praise, it was punishment. The only black student, publicly singled out by a professor who knew he wasn't supposed to win. Then Omari picked up the chalk and started writing something that made the professor's face go pale. Because what Omari solved wasn't just the problem, it was. And what happened next? It shattered everything the university thought it could hide. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The clock above the whiteboard ticked loudly, each second stretching longer than the last, as the students in room 2114 of Langston Hall sat frozen in a kind of collective anticipation. It was 9:04 a.m., but the cold that gripped the lecture hall had nothing to do with the weather outside. It came from the man at the front of the room. Professor Ronald Whitaker stood with a marker in one hand and a smirk on his face. His lectures weren't lessons, they were tests of survival. Tall, angular, and clipped in speech, he had long held a reputation on campus for being merciless, especially when the problem of the week was involved. This week's problem already covered the whiteboard. Triple integrals nested inside a limit expression, complex functions scattered between differential notations and summation symbols. It looked less like math and more like chaos. He turned slowly to face the class. "No volunteers?" he said, voice smooth but cutting. Disappointing. He scanned the room. Rows of white faces avoided his gaze, some pretending to study their notes, others scrolling aimlessly on laptops. And then, like a predator locking eyes with its target, Whitaker's stare landed in the middle of the third row. "Mr. Dorsey," he said, "why don't you give this one a shot?" A hush fell instantly over the lecture hall. Omari Dorsey looked up. He wore a dark, oversized hoodie over a second-hand winter coat, his jeans slightly frayed at the knees. He wasn't flashy, didn't raise his hand often. He had the kind of quiet presence people overlooked, until he moved. Gasps were audible. A few students glanced at each other, smirking.
"The black kid? Really?"
Whitaker didn't say it out loud. He didn't need to. Omari didn't flinch. He closed his notebook slowly, stood up, and began walking to the front of the room. His movement wasn't hurried or hesitant. It was deliberate, calm, almost too calm, the kind of calm that makes people uneasy. Whitaker stepped aside and extended the marker with a thin, tight-lipped grin. It was the kind of grin that said, "This should be entertaining." Omari took the marker. The board was large, and the math sprawled across it like an intimidating language. But to Omari, it wasn't foreign. He'd already been working the problem in his head for the past 20 minutes. Not because he wanted to show off, but because that's what his mind did when presented with a challenge. He thought in patterns, shapes, transitions. He didn't just solve problems, he heard them. He took a breath and started writing. First, he reframed the integral, using a polar coordinate substitution, a move most students wouldn't dare attempt without checking 5 reference guides. A few gasps sounded behind him. Omari didn't react. Whitaker's eyes narrowed. Line by line, Omari mapped out a transformation. The math flowed from him not with aggression but with clarity. It wasn't performative. It was precise. He shifted to spherical coordinates, broke apart the triple integrals into separable components, then applied L'Hopital's rule in a way that caused at least one student to whisper, "Wait, is that even allowed?" But he wasn't guessing. He was constructing. By the time Omari had filled half the board, the whispering had stopped. Even Jacob Myers, a white student often praised as the next big math star, leaned forward stunned. He watched as Omari used a rarely taught vector field technique that even grad students would hesitate to use without double-checking. Whitaker's arms crossed. "Mr. Dorsey," he said loud enough for everyone to hear, "you're taking an unusual approach. Are you sure you know where you're going with this?" Omari paused only for a moment. "Yes," he said. "I do." His voice was calm, confident, not loud, but firm enough to echo. It was the kind of voice no one expected to come from the quiet kid with the frayed jeans, the kind that demanded attention not by force but by clarity. And yet Whitaker's face betrayed something else now. This wasn't admiration. It wasn't pride. It was discomfort. It was the realization that the student he'd called up to fail wasn't failing. Omari continued. His hand moved swiftly now. He boxed one term, pivoted to another, corrected for boundary errors, all without a single erasure. He reached the final expression, grabbed a red marker, boxed the answer, stepped back, silent. Not the nervous kind that comes before a test. The stunned kind that comes when something undeniable has happened, because the answer was correct. Not just correct, elegant. Professor Whitaker stared at the board, his face unreadable.
Then where did you learn that method?
It wasn't praise, it was a challenge. Omari turned to face him. I taught it to myself. A beat passed. Then a few students exchanged glances. Whitaker opened his mouth as if to say something more, but nothing came out. His face tightened. Then he looked away, back at the board, like it had betrayed him. Omari walked back to his seat, slow, measured, unapologetic. But even as he sat, he felt it, that shift in the air, the subtle but unmistakable change. For the first time, eyes didn't pass over him. They locked onto him. And for the first time, Professor Whitaker didn't have the last word. But something in his stare, cold, calculating, said this wasn't over. Omari didn't know it yet, but the method he'd used, the exact way he solved that problem, was more than unique. It was eerily familiar to Whitaker, almost identical to something buried deep in his past. And Whitaker wasn't just curious. He was threatened. The air was still heavy as Omari sat down, but his hands didn't tremble. He opened his notebook like nothing extraordinary had happened, even though the room still buzzed with what they'd just witnessed. But inside Omari's chest, something did flicker, an old feeling, like a whisper from the past. He had done things like this before, but never in a space like this, surrounded by people who looked through him even while staring straight at him. To understand how Omari Dorsey got here, to this elite university, where brilliance was currency, but bias still held the pen, you had to go back. Not years, decades. Back to a one-bedroom apartment on the south side of Atlanta, where wallpaper peeled near the baseboards and roaches scattered when the kitchen light clicked on. That apartment was more than home. It was his first lab, his first classroom, his mother's sanctuary, and battlefield. His mother, Latrice Dorsey, had worked nights cleaning medical offices, and during the day pieced together childcare shifts to make ends meet. Omari barely saw her during the week, but every Friday night, no matter how exhausted she was, she'd sit with him at their chipped kitchen table and go over his homework. She never went to college, barely graduated high school, but she demanded excellence. He was 7 when he solved a high school-level algebra problem. She copied off a prep book from Goodwill. By age 10, he'd hacked together an old graphing calculator app from a borrowed library computer. By 12, he was doing math no one around him could even check. There was no one to challenge him, not at his crumbling public school, not in the community program stretched too thin to notice one quiet, lanky boy scribbling equations in spiral notebooks. Teachers praised him but never pushed him. They were too overwhelmed, and maybe quietly unsure of what to do with a black boy who didn't just love math. He breathed it. He remembered the day he brought in a self-written proof correcting a flawed problem in their district-issued textbook. His math teacher, Mrs. Ellison, smiled tightly and said, "That's great, Omari, but maybe stick to what's in the curriculum. We don't want to confuse the others." The message was always the same: know your place. But Omari never forgot his mother's voice that night, when he told her what happened. "Baby, some folks ain't ready to see you shine. That don't mean you stop shining." So he didn't. He studied by the dim light of their stove. When the power flickered, he walked an extra 3 miles, just to get better Wi-Fi outside a closed community center. He applied for scholarships without telling anyone, assuming no one would believe in him anyway. And when that email came from Langston University, full ride, elite STEM program, he didn't celebrate, not right away. Because he knew what kind of rooms he was about to walk into. Rooms like Langston Hall, where he was often the only black face, and certainly the only one who looked like he'd shopped at a thrift store that morning. He learned fast that excellence wasn't enough to earn belonging. His first week on campus, he'd raised his hand in differential equations. The professor paused before calling on him, then redirected the question to a white student, who fumbled the answer. Omari had said nothing, just like he'd said nothing when his lab partner redid his calculations and submitted them as her own. But he remembered. He kept his head down, delivered flawless test scores, never missed a lecture. His professors rarely praised him. Some didn't remember his name. Others referred to him by his seat number. The third-row kid, one TA had said aloud when reviewing the grade curves. And yet, he endured. Not because he wanted to prove anything to them, but because he had already proven everything to himself. Long ago, before the ivy-covered buildings, before the cold stares, before the viral humiliation that was about to reshape his entire life. What no one in that classroom knew, what even Omari didn't yet understand fully, was that his solution on the board had echoes of brilliance rarely seen, even at the graduate level. It was intuitive, yes, but also deeply original, and it wasn't the first time he'd thought that way. His notebooks were filled with margins of half-formed theorems, alternative proofs, and elegant tricks he hadn't learned from any class. But Whitaker had noticed something else. As Omari had written on the board, line after line, transformation after transformation, the professor's expression changed, not from confusion, but recognition. There was something eerily familiar about the structure. Not just the technique, but the flow, the cadence of the logic. Whitaker's brain was working faster now, doing its own math, mentally flipping pages from decades ago. Something in Omari's method matched an unpublished draft he had written in graduate school. A method he'd abandoned because he couldn't make the final pieces click. He had never taught it, never published it. It was his hidden gem, something he'd once hoped would win him tenure at a bigger institution. And yet here it was on a board in the hand of a kid Whitaker had never taken seriously. The thought chilled him. Omari had taken his seat again, calm, unaware, but Whitaker's mind was racing. He couldn't look away from the board. The boxed answer, the unique flow of symbols, the memory of his own rejected paper, resurfacing like a ghost. No, he thought. This wasn't coincidence. He stood there for a moment longer, stiff as stone, before turning to the class and pretending to adjust his sleeve. No acknowledgement, no praise, just a quiet, controlled dismissal. We'll continue this next lecture. The students filed out slowly, murmuring, throwing glances at Omari that were very different from the ones they gave him walking in. Some were impressed, others still skeptical. But one thing had changed. They were no longer pretending he didn't exist. Omari stayed behind, pretending to review his notes. But he was listening, watching Whitaker, who lingered, fiddling with his laptop, but not typing anything, just staring at the board. And then Whitaker did something odd. He took out his phone, snapped a photo of the board, quickly, then erased it. Omari watched the dry erase shavings fall like white dust on the floor, erasing not just the problem but the proof of what had happened. Omari stood up to leave, but caught Whitaker staring at him, not with contempt but with calculation, the kind of look someone gives when they're trying to figure out how dangerous you might become. They never said it out loud, not in front of him, but Omari could feel it in the air the same way a musician hears the dissonance in a chord. It was in the way some classmates smiled just a little too tightly when he spoke, in the awkward silence that followed when he made a correct point in group discussions, in the way lab partners would accidentally forget to text him when schedules were being decided. It was in the whispers behind doors that were almost but not quite closed. He first noticed it during week 2 of the semester. A pair of students had been chatting just outside the engineering building. Omari was exiting through a side door, headphones in but paused, untangled in his pocket. That's when he heard it. Yeah, he's smart. But come on, he's here on a scholarship. Probably some kind of diversity slot. He just acts quiet so no one realizes he's winging it. They're all like that. Omari had paused, not from surprise but recognition. He'd heard it before. Different words, same message. You don't deserve to be here. At Langston University, the racism didn't come in slurs or overt attacks. It came dressed in politeness and plausible deniability. It sat in the smiles of professors who mispronounced his name every semester. It lingered in the unnecessary clarifications when he used advanced terminology, like the assumption was always that he must be confused. It floated through the TA lounge where thin, half-jokes echoed. I mean, he's good, but is he grad school good? They're just trying to meet the DI benchmarks. You know how that goes. He's got like that Malcolm Gladwell vibe. Intense but kind of a fluke. Omari had learned not to react. If you push back, you're too sensitive. If you let it slide, you become the myth, the silent, talented black student who floats by unseen and unharmed. But the truth was, every comment stuck, every erasure accumulated. And beneath Omari's calm exterior was a pressure that had been building for years. He had come to Langston on a full scholarship. Yes, but not because he was lucky, because he'd earned it through years of unmatched academic excellence, math competitions, coding boot camps, and late nights in the corner of a 24-hour laundromat using free Wi-Fi to finish online courses no one around him even knew existed. None of that mattered to people who had already made up their minds. Especially not to Professor Ronald Whitaker. Since the board incident, the atmosphere had changed. Not in Omari's favor. Whitaker hadn't mentioned the problem again. Not during lectures. Not in emails. Not even in office hours, which Omari attended once, only to find the professor absent without notice. But what stung more was how others reacted. Some students avoided sitting near him now, like proximity to brilliance might make them feel exposed. Others offered fake praise, the kind that carries more condescension than congratulations. "Dude, that thing you did with the triple integral? Wild," Jacob said the next day, slapping Omari's shoulder too hard. "Like, where'd you learn that? YouTube?" Omari had smiled politely. "Books." Jacob nodded like he hadn't heard. "Yeah, cool. Well, glad to see you're finally speaking up. You were kind of invisible before." In group work it was worse. A week after the board incident, Omari was assigned to a 4-person project. He came prepared with an outline, a partial codebase, and a mock-up of the final analysis. When he tried to present it, one student, Lindsay, interrupted before he got past the first point. "Actually, I think we should use a simpler model. Like, no offense, but yours is kind of overkill." When Omari asked why, she didn't answer, just looked at the others for confirmation. They nodded automatically. One added, "We're all trying to keep it balanced." That word balanced stuck with him. It wasn't about balance. It was about palatability, about keeping things easy, familiar, safe. In Omari's mind, it wasn't safe for them. It was disruptive, dangerous. By the following week, a rumor had started. It crept from one hallway to the next, changing forms as it traveled. That problem, he'd seen it before. He got outside help. Someone fed him the method. Even a TA, Mark Levine, had been overheard saying, "He's not a prodigy, he's lucky. Smart, sure, but he's not that smart." Omari found out about the comment from a friend in the biology department. He didn't confront Mark. He didn't say anything. But the next day he sat in the front row earlier than usual, his notes crisp, his pen sharp. He was done trying to be invisible. Whitaker was scribbling a new problem on the board, a dense mess of multivariable optimization, the kind of equation that usually took a full page to break down. The professor turned to the class. "Anyone want to take a crack at this?" Silence. Then, deliberately, Omari stood. Gasps. Again? Whitaker blinked just once, but otherwise said nothing. His jaw tightened, ever so slightly. Omari walked to the board. This time, he didn't hesitate. He began attacking the problem with confidence, mapping out steps before anyone could blink. It was as if the equation had been written in a language only he could read. The room was still. Halfway through, Whitaker suddenly spoke up. "Mr. Dorsey," he said with a tight smile, "that partial derivative step. You dropped a variable constraint. That invalidates the next 3 lines." There it was, the trap. A smug correction. The tone wasn't academic. It was performative. For the class, for the reputation, for the whisper network always listening. Omari paused. But instead of reaching for the eraser, he stepped aside and pointed directly at the line in question. "That constraint is unnecessary," he said, clearly. "I resolved it 2 lines earlier by isolating the z variable in the polar transformation. It's implied by substitution." Whitaker's smile faltered for just a second. Omari continued, his marker never once touching the eraser. He reboxed the conclusion. "All correct. Every step, every transformation, every boundary condition, accounted for." The whisper network was silent now, not because it had vanished, but because it was watching. Omari turned around, face unreadable, and stepped back toward his seat. But before he could sit, Whitaker cleared his throat again, and this time, with a tone colder than before, said, "Stay after class. We need to have a word about your work." And just like that, Omari felt the shift, not in tone, but in intention. This wasn't about the math anymore. This was about control. Whitaker stood still, arms crossed, lips pursed into a razor-thin smile, as Omari held his ground at the whiteboard. The rest of the class sat motionless, caught in the tension that now gripped the room. Even the sound of someone's water bottle hitting the floor in the back row didn't break the silence. "Explain it again," Whitaker said, trying to keep his voice even, but the edges of irritation bled through. Omari nodded once, unfazed. He stepped to the board and pointed to the early substitution, the one Whitaker had so confidently called incorrect. I started by isolating the z variable using cylindrical coordinates, Omari said, tracing his work with the edge of his marker. That allowed me to reduce the 3-variable system to a 2-variable optimization. From there, the constraint you mentioned becomes unnecessary because I factored it out through integration bounds. It's clean, efficient, and structurally valid. His voice didn't shake. His explanation wasn't rushed. He wasn't grandstanding, just walking them through something beautiful. As he spoke, the tone in the room shifted. Something sharper than silence took over. Realization. Realization that he hadn't made a lucky guess. That this wasn't a fluke. That he knew exactly what he was doing. A girl in the front row, Caitlin, known mostly for taking meticulous notes, pulled out her phone and began recording. She tried to do it discreetly, but the glow of the screen and the intensity of the moment made it impossible not to notice. Still, no one stopped her. No one said a word.
They were witnessing something rare.
Omari continued, transforming the rest of the problem with calculated boldness. He flipped coordinate systems again, this time to spherical, introducing a symmetry no one else in the class had even considered. He leveraged it to simplify the integral into a closed form. He used Lagrange multipliers like a surgeon wields a scalpel. And he did it all without checking a single note. Whitaker's posture had changed. Subtly, but visibly. His arms were no longer crossed. His fingers tapped against his pant leg. His eyes weren't on the board anymore. They were on Omari. When Omari finally boxed the solution and stepped back, it wasn't just accurate, it was elegant. Mathematics at that level often became abstract and clinical. But what Omari had just done felt like art. Someone whispered, "Holy shit." Another said, "That was beautiful." For a long moment, Whitaker said nothing. Then, with a slow smile that didn't reach his eyes, he finally responded. "Well," he said, voice loaded with condescension masked as approval, "that's one way to approach it." No applause, no acknowledgement, just a nod designed to belittle, like a pat on the head. Omari didn't flinch. He capped the marker, set it down, and returned to his seat. He didn't look at Whitaker. He didn't need to. The rest of the lecture ran on autopilot. No one was listening. The board had been erased, but not before Caitlin's video had captured every second. By 4:30 p.m., the footage had already been uploaded, first to a private group chat, then to Reddit, then to TikTok. The caption read, "POV, our professor tries to embarrass the quiet kid, and he ends up teaching the entire class instead." It didn't take long for the video to spread. The comments came fast. "Wait, this kid is a beast. That's not undergrad math. This is PhD level work. Why does the prof look like he's about to faint?" But the viral moment didn't follow the script Omari would have imagined. Because soon, the comments shifted from admiration to speculation to subtle racism. "He's too good. No way he did that on his own. Bet he rehearsed that. Scripted. Affirmative action doing overtime out here." Someone cropped a screenshot of Omari mid-solution and tweeted, "When DI hires go rogue and actually solve stuff." It got 12,000 likes in 3 hours. By 10 p.m., the video had over 1 million views. By midnight, the trolls had arrived. Omari was sitting in the library, headphones on, when he finally opened his phone and saw what was happening. Dozens of DMs, mentions, tags, screenshots of memes made with his face. He scrolled. Read. Stopped. Read again. Some praised him. Others laughed at him. Many accused him of cheating, of being coached, of being placed in the classroom for optics. He leaned back in the chair, eyes closed. This wasn't new. Being doubted, being questioned, being picked apart. But the scale of it now, the volume, it was different. He thought back to the walk home he took in high school. The one where he carried a trophy from a citywide math competition, only to be stopped by a cop who asked why he was out late and if the trophy was really his. This felt like that. Winning but being treated like a thief. Across campus in his office, Professor Whitaker sat in front of his computer, scrolling through the same video, watching it again and again. His face unreadable, but inside, something churned. Because what he saw in Omari's solution wasn't just brilliance. It was familiar. Uncomfortably familiar. There was a method, a structure deep within the equations that echoed something he'd once written himself, decades ago in a draft thesis that never got published. Something he'd abandoned, because the final proof had eluded him. He hadn't shown it to anyone. And yet, here it was, resurrected by a student he had never once taken seriously. Whitaker opened a locked drawer, pulled out an old binder, flipped through yellowing pages, stared at a line of calculus written in his own shaky, youthful hand. It was almost identical. He closed the binder slowly, eyes narrowing, not in awe, but in suspicion. How could this boy have known his work? And if he did, what else did he know? By morning, Omari's name wasn't just trending on campus. It was trending online. The video of him solving the calculus problem had spread like wildfire, first among academic circles, then among debate bros, then finally into the hands of political grifters and culture war opportunists. The original clip, posted by Caitlin, had a neutral title, Student Silences Professor with Next-Level Calculus Solution. But it didn't stay that way for long. On Reddit, the top thread was renamed, entitled Kid Schools His Professor Smirks While Doing It. YouTube thumbnails popped up with exaggerated expressions, bold red text screaming, affirmative action backfires, cocky kid showboats, professor embarrassed. Woke colleges are eating themselves alive. It wasn't about math anymore. It was about image. One freeze frame, a moment where Omari briefly glanced at Whitaker while explaining his method, was used in countless memes. Someone overlaid sunglasses on him and added thug life text beneath. Another version had him edited in front of a burning whiteboard, with the caption, "When you know you're the smartest in the room and they hate you for it."
That one stung.
Because the laugh wasn't with him. It was at him. By mid-afternoon, the tone had shifted completely. The comments on TikTok turned sharp. Why's he acting like he invented math? Smug little bastard thinks he's better than the professor. Classic. Play the victim while disrespecting authority. Can't wait till he fails real life. Then came the racial undertones. And then the overtones. Someone posted, all that attitude just to end up driving an Uber. Another, when DI students get too bold. One thread outright asked, do you think this guy even belongs at a top school? Be honest. It wasn't just social media trolls. Some of it came from inside Langston's own community. A student forum titled Langston Exposed reposted the video, re-edited with cuts and music designed to make Omari look dramatic. They slowed down his confident response. I taught it to myself to make it sound sarcastic. The post read, when your scholarship kid forgets he's not the teacher. Omari found the post. His heart beat hard in his chest, not from fear but from something deeper. That cold old feeling, like the walls were moving in. His inbox filled with hate. His school email. His social media. His LinkedIn. Some were crude, others were coded. You should be more humble. Black men like you don't last long in academia. You embarrassed a respected professor. Maybe it's time you rethink your priorities. We're watching. He read each one. He shouldn't have, but he did. Every word etched into him. And then just when he thought it couldn't get worse, the university weighed in. A bland, sterile email blast hit every student's inbox under the subject line, Statement on Classroom Decorum. The message read, Langston University values academic freedom, integrity, and respect for all voices in the classroom. We remind all students of the importance of maintaining respectful dialogue and acknowledging the role of our esteemed faculty. Disruptive behavior, no matter how well-intentioned, can compromise the learning environment. Omari stared at the screen. They hadn't named him, but everyone knew who it was about. They didn't praise his solution. They didn't defend his right to speak. They didn't correct the twisted narrative. They protected the system. Professor Whitaker, on the other hand, remained silent. No tweets. No interviews. No appearances. But the silence wasn't innocence. It was strategy. And it worked. A few days after the university's email, Omari received a message from his academic advisor. Hi Omari, would love to chat briefly. There's been some concern about the recent attention your class received. Nothing urgent, just a touch base. He didn't reply, because by then it was already out of his hands. Caitlin messaged him privately, apologizing. I didn't know it would blow up like this. You were amazing. I just wanted people to see how unfair it was. I'm so sorry. He didn't answer her either. Not because he was angry, but because he was tired. This wasn't about one moment at the board. This was years of being quietly brilliant, and never believed. It was every teacher who overlooked him. Every classmate who talked over him. Every professor who nodded and smiled but never remembered his name. And now the world was watching. But through a cracked lens. He walked through campus with headphones on, hood up, shoulders tense. Every glance felt longer than it should. Every chuckle behind him sounded like a joke at his expense. He couldn't focus in class, couldn't sleep, couldn't shake the sound of those comments repeating in his head like a broken metronome.
Arrogant.
Smug. Doesn't belong. Watch your place. He'd done everything right. And still it wasn't enough. He had outsmarted a system built to underestimate him, and the system had simply moved the goalposts. That night, alone in his dorm, he opened his inbox and saw a message flagged as Priority Media Inquiry. It was from Vista America News, a national television network with a long record of debating both sides of racial controversy stories. The email read, "We're covering the viral Langston University classroom video and would love to get Professor Whitaker's perspective on the matter. Our producers are coordinating an exclusive interview to address the situation from the academic side. Please confirm availability." Omari blinked. They didn't want his perspective. They wanted the professor's, and before he could process it, his phone lit up with a push notification. Breaking. Professor at Elite University responds to viral video backlash. Tune in live at 8 p.m. The email arrived just after sunrise. Subject line, mandatory meeting, Dean's office, 11. No explanation, no details, just an address, a time, and a cryptic request. Please bring your laptop and all materials related to your Calculus 3 coursework. Omari sat at his desk, reading the message again. His room was still dark, blinds drawn, the only light coming from his computer screen. The smell of stale instant coffee clung to the air. He hadn't slept much, not since the video went viral, not since his inbox became a flood of bile and threats. The statement from the university still echoed in his mind. How it called for decorum, but never defended him. Now this. A closed-door meeting. He knew what it was. They weren't checking in. They were coming for him. By 10:55 a.m., Omari stood outside the dean's office, laptop bag slung over his shoulder, shoulders squared. He wore the same hoodie from the day he solved the problem, the one they all remembered him in. He knew how symbolism worked. If they wanted a spectacle, he'd bring them the same version of himself they tried to erase. The administrative assistant gave a polite, forced smile and motioned for him to enter. Inside, Dean Meredith Calloway sat at the end of a long conference table, flanked by two other faculty members, Omari barely recognized. A folder sat in front of her. The room smelled like air freshener and old paper. "Mr. Dorsey," she began, gesturing to a chair. "Please, have a seat." Omari sat, silently. "This won't take long," she continued. Her tone was smooth, but it had that careful cadence, the one used by people pretending not to be hostile. "We're conducting a preliminary review into the academic integrity concerns raised after last week's events." Omari's jaw tightened. "Concerns?" Dean Calloway nodded. "Yes, specifically surrounding the originality of your solution to Professor Whitaker's calculus problem." A cold silence dropped between them. "I wasn't aware originality was a crime," Omari said. One of the professors across from him, Dr. Harrison, he remembered, cleared his throat. "It's not, Mr. Dorsey, but your methodology was unconventional. Very advanced. Some have suggested it reflects knowledge not typically acquired at the undergraduate level." Omari leaned forward, voice steady. "I've been teaching myself math at that level since I was 12. You can check my test scores, my notebooks, my work. It's all mine." Dean Calloway offered a tight smile. "That's what we intend to do, which is why we'll need access to your laptop. We're not accusing you of anything, Mr. Dorsey. We're simply investigating all possible explanations." He recognized the language. "Not accusing you. Just implying guilt from the moment you walk in the room." Still, Omari opened his bag and handed them the laptop without a word. He'd learned long ago that protest often just gave them more ammunition. Dean Calloway took it delicately, like it might detonate. "We'll also be reviewing your academic record," she added. "Not because we doubt your achievements, of course not, but simply to confirm consistency across your performance history." Omari stared at her. "You mean to check if I've always been this smart? Or if I just got lucky this semester?" No one answered, because that was what they meant. The meeting ended with promises of clarity and objectivity, but Omari knew better. He walked out with his bag lighter and his suspicion heavier. They weren't looking for answers. They were looking for cracks, evidence to justify the doubt they'd always carried. Back on campus, the whispers returned. Not about the brilliance this time. About the investigation.
"He's under review."
Probably cheated. Too good to be true. Some students began avoiding him entirely. Others offered fake sympathy. Hope it all works out, man, Jacob said one afternoon, voice dripping with faux concern. I'm sure it's just protocol. Omari didn't respond. He'd stopped trying to correct people's assumptions. He let their silence say what it needed to say. The same students who watched him solve problems they couldn't even understand were now doubting if he should have solved them at all. That was the power of the system. It didn't need to prove you guilty. It just needed to suggest that you might be. Meanwhile, Professor Whitaker remained quiet. Publicly, he made no statement, no social media posts, no interviews, but quietly, he moved. The department held a closed meeting. Omari wasn't invited. Rumors circulated that Whitaker had raised concerns about classroom behavior, about tone, about intimidating academic performance. He used coded phrases: professional decorum, academic appropriateness, intellectual humility. Not once did he mention race. He didn't need to. Behind the scenes, emails were sent. References to upsetting classroom dynamics. Private complaints to the academic committee. A whisper to another faculty member about Omari's lack of collaborative spirit. He was building a paper trail, not to attack, to discredit. Days passed. No updates from the dean. No return of the laptop. Omari sat in class, forced to watch students take notes on screens, while his own sat locked away, somewhere he couldn't reach. Professors watched him now, subtly, not with admiration, with caution. The weight grew heavier. At night he sat at his desk, scribbling notes longhand. He didn't trust public computers, didn't want to log into anything, not while he was being watched. One evening, just after sunset, there was a knock at his dorm room door. No one ever knocked. Omari stood, cautious. Outside, in the hallway, no one waited. Just a manila envelope, unmarked, resting against the door frame. He looked down both ends of the hall. Empty. He picked it up slowly, brought it inside, and shut the door. No name, no return address. Inside he found a stack of papers, photocopies, yellowed, scanned from an old typewritten draft, a handwritten title at the top of the first page. On the reconciliation of vector field integration and non-standard coordinate systems, R. Whitaker. Omari froze. He flipped through the pages. It was a thesis draft, dated. His eyes scanned the lines, the language, the techniques, the structure. And then there it was, a solution to a problem so similar to the one he had solved in class. It made his chest tighten, the methodology practically identical to what he had written on the whiteboard. But then he reached the last page. It wasn't a conclusion. It was a note scribbled in the margin in pen, clearly Whitaker's own handwriting. Incomplete. Not provable beyond line 47. Inconsistent results. Potential theoretical error. Omari stared. Whitaker had tried the same technique, failed to complete it, abandoned the method. And now, here Omari was having completed the solution decades later. Not only had he done something no one else in that room could do, he had done something Whitaker himself had failed to do. Omari turned over the last page and found a single sticky note stuck to the back, written in block letters. Be careful. They erase what they can't control. The papers spread across Omari's desk looked like they had been pulled from a forgotten archive. Each page yellowed and uneven, as if time had tried to swallow them whole. But the ink, though faded, was unmistakably familiar. He ran his fingers along the edge of the thesis. Ronald Whitaker's name typed neatly at the top of each page, the same name printed on the syllabus he'd been handed at the start of the semester. But what mattered wasn't the name. It was the math. Omari's eyes darted line by line, heart pounding faster with every page. The structure mirrored his own solution, almost exactly. The rotation of coordinates, the reduction of variables, the unique integral path. Each piece read like a shadow of what he had put on that whiteboard days ago. But Whitaker hadn't completed it. He had gotten close, very close. But the final proof, what Omari had boxed confidently and read, was where Whitaker had failed. Omari leaned back in his chair, hands locked behind his head, breathing hard. It wasn't a coincidence. Whitaker had recognized the method not because it was advanced, but because it was his. Or rather, what he had once tried to make his, and never could. Omari hadn't stolen anything, but he had touched something Whitaker had once considered brilliant, then buried. This wasn't just about ego. It was about legacy. Omari hadn't humiliated Whitaker with attitude. He had done it with competence. And that, Omari realized now, was unforgivable. It started to make sense. The stiff silence in the classroom, the erasure of the board before students could take photos, the quiet maneuvering behind the scenes. Whitaker hadn't just been caught off guard. He had been threatened, because Omari didn't just mirror his work. He had completed it, refined it, publicly, effortlessly, in front of students, cameras, and now the internet. And the thesis draft in Omari's hands. It was a ghost from Whitaker's past, proof that the professor's best, unfinished work had been revived and perfected by a student the institution saw as nothing more than a diversity admission. Omari sat at his desk for hours, studying the thesis line by line. Not to critique it, not to gloat, but to understand. The deeper he went, the more Whitaker's earlier brilliance became undeniable. There was ambition in the work, vision, the kind that could have redefined a career. So why hadn't it been published? And more importantly, who had sent it to him? The envelope was still unmarked. No name, no note except the warning at the end. Be careful, they erase what they can't control. Was it a former student? A colleague? Someone who knew the truth? Whoever it was, they had given Omari leverage, proof that his method wasn't stolen. It was part of a conversation Whitaker himself had abandoned. Still, Omari knew that evidence wasn't always enough. People didn't care about facts. They cared about narratives. And right now, the narrative was clear. Omari was too bold, too confident, and worst of all, ungrateful. He had shown up in their institution and reminded them that brilliance doesn't always come dressed in blazers and legacy admissions. It could come in hoodies, headphones, and hands with cracked knuckles from years of writing problems on gas station receipt paper. By Friday afternoon, Omari made a decision. He printed out 2 copies of the thesis draft, one for himself, one to deliver, and placed the original back in the envelope. His hands shook, but not from fear, from something else. Resolve. He wasn't going to be silent anymore. Langston's math department was unusually quiet that day. Most professors had left early for the weekend. Students milled around the hallway, some whispering, some pretending not to stare as Omari walked past. He stopped outside Whitaker's office, door closed. Frosted glass. A small plaque with the professor's name neatly engraved. He knocked once. No answer. He knocked again. Still nothing. He turned to leave, then stopped. The door cracked open behind him. Whitaker stood there, calm, composed, that same flat expression he wore when pretending to listen. His eyes scanned Omari quickly, then dropped to the envelope in his hand. "Mr. Dorsey," he said, voice clipped. "I wasn't expecting you." Omari met his gaze. "We need to talk." Whitaker hesitated. Just a beat too long. "About what?" Omari held up the envelope. "About something that belongs to you." A flicker of something, recognition, anxiety, passed across the professor's face. He stepped aside without a word and motioned for Omari to enter. The office was neat. Books lined the walls. A Newton's cradle sat beside a framed photo of a much younger Whitaker shaking hands with someone Omari didn't recognize. Omari placed the envelope on the desk. Whitaker didn't touch it. He just stared. "You recognize it," Omari said. Whitaker didn't answer. "You tried to solve that problem in '96. You got close. Closer than most would ever get. But you stopped. You filed it away. And when I walked into your class and solved it in front of everyone, you weren't surprised I could do it. You were surprised that someone like me could." Silence. Whitaker finally spoke, his voice low. "You're making dangerous assumptions." Omari leaned in slightly. "No, I'm just stating what's already written in your own handwriting." Whitaker's eyes narrowed. "Where did you get that?" "I didn't steal it, if that's what you're asking," Omari said calmly. "It found its way to me, just like the narrative you've been spinning about me has found its way to everyone else." Whitaker said nothing. "You could have used this as a moment to mentor," Omari continued, "to celebrate something bigger than ego, but instead you tried to bury it. And when that didn't work, you tried to bury me." Whitaker finally moved slowly, reaching for the envelope. But just then, a knock sounded at the door. Both men turned. A moment later, the door opened fully. Campus security. 2 officers stepped inside, expressionless, their badges catching the fluorescent light. "Professor Whitaker," one said. "Yes?" Whitaker replied, quickly stepping in front of his desk. "We received a call regarding a potential academic integrity violation," the officer said. "We've been asked to collect any related documents immediately." Whitaker blinked. "That won't be necessary." But the officer continued, stepping forward. We've been informed that Mr. Dorsey may be in possession of restricted university material. Omari stood frozen. This wasn't random. This was planned. Whitaker had called them, expecting this confrontation, and now the narrative was being flipped again. The brilliant student wasn't just under investigation. Now he was being treated like a thief. As the officer reached for the envelope, Omari noticed something else on Whitaker's desk, a USB drive, partially hidden beneath a folder. Its label read, Hayes, 1997. And Omari knew, in that instant, this went far deeper than he imagined. Omari had never seen the inside of Langston's disciplinary review office. He didn't even know where it was, until that morning. 2 security officers escorted him across campus like he was carrying explosives, their hands hovering near radios on their belts. They didn't put him in cuffs, but the message was clear. You're not here by invitation. You're here because someone decided you're a problem. Inside the glass-walled office, a woman with tightly pulled hair and a clipped voice introduced herself as Ms. Brenner, the university's academic compliance liaison. She didn't look up when she greeted him, just pointed to the chair across from her and said, "We're in receipt of information, indicating you may have gained unauthorized access to protected faculty data, specifically, a research draft authored by Professor Whitaker." Omari froze. The envelope. The thesis. "I didn't hack anything," he said, voice level. "Then how did you obtain his unpublished work?" "It was left at my door. Anonymously." Ms. Brenner finally looked up. Her expression didn't shift. "Convenient." Omari exhaled. "I didn't ask for it. I didn't even know it existed until 3 nights ago. I brought it to Professor Whitaker myself, and then campus security was contacted." "By him," Omari said. Ms. Brenner tilted her head. "We're not here to discuss motives. We're here to determine whether you violated the university's code of conduct by possessing and potentially using proprietary faculty research for academic gain." Omari's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Because no matter how absurd it sounded, he knew how this worked. They weren't looking for truth. They were looking for justification. He was handed a formal letter, temporary academic suspension, effective immediately, pending full investigation. His campus ID was deactivated. He was not to attend classes, access school facilities, or speak with any faculty without legal representation. They took his laptop, and with it, everything. Every saved proof, every personal note, every line of code from projects he built alone, gone. Not erased but stripped from his hands. Like his knowledge could be taken with the tools he used to create it. The whispers returned, sharper this time. He hacked the prof's research. Guess the math wasn't really his. They're saying he copied it line for line from Whitaker's old thesis. From the dining hall to the dorm corridors, the story moved faster than truth ever could. And now, when Omari walked into common areas, the effect was immediate. Silence. Sideways glances. Averted eyes. Even the professors he'd impressed only weeks earlier now avoided his presence entirely. One even turned and walked in the opposite direction when he spotted Omari outside the department office. His lab group dropped him from the shared drive without warning. Caitlin, the one who had posted the original video, sent a panicked message. "They emailed me asking for the raw footage. I gave it to them. I didn't know they were going to twist this into something legal." She apologized, but it didn't change anything. By Friday, the phrase academic fraud allegation appeared in student-run forums next to his name. A new Reddit thread called Langston's Fraud Genius had over 5,000 upvotes. The comments read like a slow dissection, kinda called it, "He was too polished for a freshman. Funny how he got caught with research he never saw. Sure, buddy. This is why academic gatekeeping exists. To protect real work from performance artists." Omari stopped reading. He had to. Because the more he read, the more it chipped away at something essential. Not his pride, but his center. The part of him that believed in merit, in effort, in education. He had spent his whole life building toward this moment. And now it felt like the foundation had been kicked out from under him. Not because he failed, but because he succeeded too publicly, too unapologetically, and in the wrong skin. By Sunday morning, Omari's room was dark and cold. He hadn't left in 2 days. He stared at his whiteboard, now erased. Blank. Like the university had tried to do to him. The desk was bare except for a single folder. The photocopies of Whitaker's thesis he had kept for himself. He'd read them again and again, searching for answers. Not just about the math, but about why a man like Whitaker had buried it. And why he'd rather see Omari destroyed then acknowledged the echo of his own work. There was a knock at the door. Omari didn't move. Another knock. Then silence. He rose slowly and opened it. No one stood outside. Just a piece of paper folded neatly, slid under the frame. He picked it up. On the outside, one line was written in blue pen. "You're not the first." Omari's heart jumped. He unfolded the paper. Inside was a typed note. No signature. No return address. Just 4 lines. "Whitaker tried to bury me too. I have proof of what he did to his students. You don't know how far he'll go. If you want answers, meet me tomorrow. 9:00 p.m. Bellevue parking deck. Top level." There was no threat. No just the truth. He wasn't alone. Omari folded the note, slipped it into his jacket, and looked out the window. For the first time in days, he felt something stirring. Not relief, not hope, but momentum. And whoever this mysterious former student was, they were about to change everything. The top level of the Bellevue parking deck was almost empty. Just concrete, wind, and the low hum of the city in the distance. The kind of place you only go when you want to be alone, or when you're about to say something no one else should hear. Omari stood near the railing, hoodie pulled tight, eyes scanning the entrance ramp. It was 9:02 p.m. He clutched the folded note in his pocket, fingertips brushing its creased edges like a reminder that this wasn't a dream. He wasn't the first, and maybe he wouldn't be the last. A car pulled up, headlights off. A gray Honda Civic, beat up but still running. The driver stepped out. She was younger than he expected, early 20s, hair in thick braids, a worn Langston hoodie pulled over her frame. She walked with a guarded tension, like someone used to checking every mirror twice. "You're Omari," she said. No introduction needed. He nodded. "You wrote the note."
I did.
She walked closer, eyes sharp. "Name's Jasmine." Jasmine Porter. The name rang faint bells. "I've heard of you," Omari said. "You were the department's top student 3 years ago. Math honors, double major. Then, you disappeared." Jasmine smiled. But it didn't reach her eyes. "I didn't disappear," she said quietly. "I was erased." Omari didn't speak. He let her continue. Jasmine leaned against the concrete barrier, arms folded, her voice low and calm. "I came here on a full ride too. Same as you. I wasn't just top of my class. I was already co-authoring research papers by sophomore year. I thought I was unstoppable." She paused. "Then I met Professor Whitaker." Omari swallowed, eyes fixed on her. At first he seemed impressed. Encouraging, even. Told me I had a mind for real mathematics. Gave me special projects. Let me present in front of the grad students. But it changed the moment I started getting noticed. "What do you mean?" Omari asked. "I mean, the moment other professors started asking about my work. The moment external research programs reached out. Suddenly, he wasn't proud. He was possessive." She turned to him. "First he stopped replying to my emails. Then he cut me from the honors thesis program. Said I wasn't ready. He started marking my tests down, questioning my methods, even when I had proof. Eventually he accused me of academic dishonesty." Omari's chest tightened. "He claimed I'd collaborated on an assignment I submitted solo." Jasmine continued. "Said my work was too advanced to be my own." Sound familiar? Omari clenched his fists. "I fought it. I appealed. But the department backed him. Quietly, of course. No public hearing. Just enough pressure to push me out. My scholarship was revoked. After the investigation, I had no money left. So I left." Silence hung between them, thick with truth. "And no one believed you?" Omari asked. Jasmine laughed, bitter. "Some did, but not enough. And none of them spoke up. Whitaker's built something here. This idea that he's the gatekeeper of genius. He rewards the students who mirror him, who stay in line, but if you outshine him, if you dare to be more, especially if you don't fit his image of what brilliance should look like, he'll bury you." Omari stared at the concrete beneath his feet. He wasn't surprised, just sickened. "I thought maybe it was just me," Jasmine said, her voice cracking slightly. "But when I saw your video, the solution, the way he looked at you, I knew. He's still doing it." Omari looked up. "Why now? Why come forward?" Jasmine pulled a flash drive from her pocket, held it out. "Because I kept the receipts." Omari hesitated, then took it. "What is this?" "Audio files," she said. "Recordings from my meetings with him. I started recording after I realized what he was doing. There's one you need to hear." Omari plugged the drive into his laptop that night. There were 6 recordings. He listened to all of them, quietly, in the dark. But one stood out. It was dated March 12th, 2 years ago. Jasmine's voice was quiet, trying to defend her methodology on a problem set. Whitaker cut her off. Jasmine, let's be honest. You're brilliant, but brilliance without boundaries becomes arrogance. You don't need to prove you're better than everyone else. I'm not trying to prove anything. Your place here isn't to dominate. It's to learn. To listen. When students like you get too confident, it creates disruption, and frankly, some people start asking if you belong here at all.
The pause in Jasmine's voice was painful.
Students like me? You know what I mean. Omari paused the recording. He sat back, heart thundering in his chest. It was there. The subtext. The implication. The coded racism laced with authority and smugness. The exact attitude Omari had felt, but couldn't name. Whitaker wasn't just biased. He was strategic. He wielded power through plausible deniability. He destroyed students without ever raising his voice. And now, Omari had proof, not just of Whitaker's past, but of his pattern. The next day, Omari met Jasmine again. They sat in a quiet back corner of an off-campus cafe. He slid the flash drive back to her, eyes focused. I need your permission to share it, he said. Jasmine looked down, thought, then nodded. Use it, she said. But be careful. They'll protect him before they protect the truth. Omari nodded slowly. He knew what came next wouldn't be easy. He was about to go from accused student to whistleblower. As he left the cafe, Omari's phone buzzed. A text from a blocked number. Be careful what you expose. Some equations are meant to stay buried. The leak hit the internet at 8:40. A Twitter user with the handle A Langston Leaks posted a 3-minute audio clip titled, You Know What I Mean, Whitaker Exposed. The file didn't need context. It didn't need editing. It didn't even need a caption. It spoke for itself. When students like you get too confident, it creates disruption. And frankly, some people start asking if you belong here at all. Students like me? You know what I mean. By noon, it had nearly 1 million plays. Langston University's Twitter account, usually a quiet stream of press releases and alumni photos, became a war zone. Former students, current students, faculty, activists, everyone had something to say. Hashtags took over. Whitaker exposed. We are Omari. Math while black. Langston leaked. The story exploded. What had once been a private ordeal, a quiet academic lynching buried beneath paperwork, was now public property. And the public wasn't just interested, it was furious. Especially Langston's Black alumni. Within hours, the Langston Black Alumni Network, LBN, a 4,000-member strong group of former students, issued a joint statement. We stand with Omari Dorsey. We have seen this playbook before. Weaponized doubt, academic silencing, and institutional gaslighting. We demand transparency, accountability, and justice. What followed was a tidal wave. Graduates began posting their own stories, under the hashtag Langston Leak. Tales of professors who graded them unfairly, who doubted their credentials, who called them articulate, like it was a compliment. One former student wrote, Whitaker told me I wasn't ready for grad-level math. I ended up getting a PhD at MIT. I still hear his voice when I question my worth. Enough is enough. Another posted, he told me I was too aggressive when I asked for feedback. I left the department the next semester. That man crushed more dreams than he ever nurtured. Omari read each one with a mixture of pain and clarity. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about all of them. Meanwhile, inside Langston's administrative offices, panic was setting in. Donor calls flooded in, not of support but outrage. I didn't fund a legacy of discrimination, one said before pulling a 6-figure donation. Another corporation announced a suspension of recruitment partnerships with the university pending an internal investigation into systemic bias. Department chairs were summoned to emergency meetings. PR consultants were brought in. Emails flew back and forth with subjects like reputation management, urgent talking points, and containment strategy. The university issued a formal response by day's end. We take these allegations very seriously and have launched an independent review. We value diversity, integrity, and academic excellence. We encourage our community to remain respectful as the process unfolds. But it was too late for neutrality. The campus had already chosen a side. Student rallies formed on the quad. Posters of Omari's face appeared with bold block letters. They tried to erase him. A chalk mural on the physics building read simply, "Proof doesn't need permission." Whitaker, meanwhile, broke his silence on a syndicated morning show. Seated stiffly in a navy suit, he looked every bit the distinguished academic, composed, articulate, and importantly aggrieved. "I've served this university for over 30 years, he said, voice carefully measured. "I have always believed in merit, discipline, and academic rigor. I'm deeply troubled by the narrative being crafted around me. It's simply not accurate." He spoke of a smear campaign, of a rushed judgment, and of a young man who may be talented, but has chosen a path of public spectacle rather than respectful discourse. When asked directly about the audio, Whitaker didn't deny it was his voice. He simply said, "Context matters." That phrase, "context matters," became its own meme within the hour. Screenshots of Whitaker's face circled online, paired with sarcastic captions. Context. When racism isn't technically illegal. He didn't mean black, he meant brilliant. Merit, discipline, and other euphemisms for know your place. For Omari, watching the spin unfold was surreal. His name was everywhere, but so was doubt. Even now, commentators debated whether he had gone too far. He should have filed a private complaint. Why leak the audio? Isn't that a violation of trust? Do we want students policing their professors now? Even supporters seemed cautious. "I believe Omari, but I worry about the precedent." He realized then. For some, the issue wasn't truth. It was tone. His brilliance didn't protect him. His evidence didn't vindicate him. Even with the truth laid bare, he still had to earn the right to be believed. And then came the twist. A major national news network, CNX Live, announced a special televised segment, Genius or Disruption, the debate over academic merit and race. The program would feature both Professor Ronald Whitaker and Omari Dorsey, seated side by side, live in front of a studio audience. The moderator, none other than Franklin Ross, a journalist known for moderating difficult conversations with viral potential, and for asking sharp, uncomfortable questions. The university didn't endorse it, but they didn't block it either. They couldn't afford to look like they were silencing Omari now. It was happening. Omari was being offered something few students ever were, a national platform, a seat at the table. But it didn't feel like an invitation. It felt like a final test. He told Jasmine first. They were sitting in her car, outside the student union, where protesters still waved posters and chanted slogans. "I don't know if I should do it," Omari said. Jasmine looked over at him. "He tried to erase you. Now you get to write your name in ink." Omari looked out the window. Students were gathering, wearing hoodies with his face printed across the front, bold lettering beneath. Omari Dorsey solved the problem. Now solve the system. He turned back to her. "I'm not doing this for revenge." "I know," she said. "You're doing it because if you don't, they'll make him the victim, and you the story." He nodded, then exhaled. He would do it. Not for the camera, but for every student who had sat in silence, for everyone who had been told, "You know what I mean," for everyone who was still afraid to speak. Omari walked back into his dorm to prepare, only to find a handwritten note slid under his door. "If you go on that stage, there will be consequences." No name. Just that threat. Just enough to remind him. The system wasn't finished fighting back. The stage lights buzzed overhead, warm and clinical, casting long shadows on the minimalist set. 2 chairs, a circular table, a giant digital screen glowing in the background. Merit or misconduct? A national conversation on race, academia, and truth. It was more than a panel. It was a performance, live-streamed across all major networks, amplified on social media, dissected in real time by pundits and professors alike. This wasn't just a debate, it was a referendum. On bias, on power, on who gets to be called brilliant. Omari stood backstage, heart pounding slow but heavy. Not with nerves, with weight, with history. Jasmine had helped him prepare. They'd gone through every talking point, every statistic, every potential trap. She'd said, "This isn't about winning, it's about witnessing. Let them see what they try to bury." He was dressed simply. No suit, no tie. Just a black button-down, slacks, and his notebook. His hair was cropped clean. His expression unreadable. The producer waved him forward. And Omari stepped into the light. Across from him, already seated, was Professor Ronald Whitaker, polished in a navy suit, legs crossed, hands resting calmly on his lap. He greeted Omari with a nod that was just professional enough to pass for respect. But Omari saw through it. He saw the calculation behind the eyes, the smile that didn't reach them, the same look from the whiteboard that first day in class. Moderator Franklin Ross greeted them both with the gravity of a man used to hosting national reckonings. "We're here," he began, "to explore the intersection of academic integrity, race, and the power structures that often remain hidden in institutions of learning. Two voices, two versions of the same story. Let's begin." The first 20 minutes were polite, scripted. Ross asked questions about curriculum standards, the role of mentorship, the expectations of academic excellence. Whitaker played the role perfectly. "I've always championed rigor," he said smoothly. "Regardless of background, my commitment has never been to who the student is, but to what they bring." Omari held back at first. He let the words hang, let the audience feel the chill beneath them. Then he spoke. "I never asked for special treatment," he said. "I asked for recognition. I submitted work that was dismissed as too advanced. I solved problems no one else could. And the response wasn't mentorship. It was investigation." The audience leaned in. Omari pulled out printed examples, his test scores, timestamps, lecture notes. He referenced the thesis, the flash drive, the recordings, every receipt, every scar. The crowd began to murmur. Ross turned to Whitaker. "Professor, what do you say to students who felt targeted by your methods, or who claim your standard of rigor changed depending on who was in front of you?" Whitaker sighed, perfectly timed. "I think we're in danger of confusing discomfort with injustice. Not every critique is a bias. Not every high standard is oppression." Omari didn't flinch. He slid a document across the table. "It's not discomfort when patterns emerge. Multiple students, over years, all gifted, all marginalized, all gone." Whitaker didn't look at the paper, but his jaw tightened. Ross pivoted. "Let's talk about the viral video. Omari, you solved a complex calculus problem live in class. That sparked all of this. What did you feel in that moment?" Omari paused. "Free," he said, "for about 10 seconds, until I turned around and saw a face that didn't look impressed. It looked threatened, and I knew right then what was coming." The silence was powerful, but Whitaker had prepared for this. He adjusted his glasses. "I think it's time we talk about something that hasn't been mentioned," he said, turning to the moderator. "Omari's method, the one he claims is his own, has striking similarities to unpublished work by a very specific mathematician, one who, to my knowledge, he has connections with." Ross blinked. "You're suggesting he had help?" Whitaker nodded. "Yes, I believe Omari Dorsey received private assistance from a renowned mathematician, possibly even direct coaching." He let the name drop like a hammer. "Dr. Ellison Hayes." Gasps. The name carried weight. Dr. Hayes was a legend in the math world. A reclusive genius, once hailed as the Black Goss, who had vanished from academia decades ago, after a series of high-profile conflicts with white institutions that never fully accepted his genius. Omari froze. He knew of Hayes, researched his work, quoted him in his private notebooks, but he had never met the man, never spoken to him. Ross leaned forward. "Omari, is that true? Have you ever been in contact with Dr. Hayes?" "No," Omari said instantly, brows furrowed. "Never. I've read his work. I've admired his mind, but I've never spoken to him." Whitaker smiled. "Just enough. Well, perhaps Dr. Hayes will be willing to confirm that himself, or not." It was a trap, designed to inject doubt, to turn Omari's genius into borrowed brilliance, to make it sound like homage was cheating. Ross glanced at the producers, then at the camera. "This is live television," he said, "and it seems we're receiving an incoming call." A moment passed. Then a voice filled the studio. Rough, measured, unmistakable. "This is Dr. Ellison Hayes. I'm watching." Omari's eyes widened. Even Whitaker sat up straighter. The audio crackled for a moment, then steadied. "I do not know Mr. Dorsey personally," Hayes said, "but I saw that video the day it hit the net. I've read the transcripts. I've seen the work." He paused. "And let me be very clear. He didn't copy me. He didn't mimic me. He extended something I couldn't finish. What he did wasn't replication. It was innovation. And anyone who says otherwise is lying or threatened." Gasps swept the audience. Ross's mouth hung slightly open. Omari blinked, stunned. Hayes continued. "I tried that method 30 years ago. I got close, but I missed something. Watching that boy on the whiteboard. He saw it. He heard it. Math like that. You don't coach it. You carry it. That's not plagiarism. That's legacy. Whitaker sat frozen, mouth slightly open. Hayes's voice grew colder. And Professor Whitaker, I've read your draft. You didn't get there either. Dead silence. Stop hiding behind false accusations. You saw something rare, and you tried to smother it. Then the call ended. Just static. And the studio left in stunned quiet. Ross turned slowly toward Omari. How does it feel, he asked, to have your work defended by the one man they claimed you copied? Omari looked into the camera and whispered, now let's talk about who really plagiarized who. The air in the studio was electric, not with applause but with revelation. The voice of Dr. Ellison Hayes still echoed in the minds of everyone watching. A voice that had been absent from public discourse for nearly 3 decades. A voice that once lectured to halls packed with aspiring mathematicians before he walked away from academia in silence, leaving behind equations no one could finish and questions no one dared ask. Until now. On the screen behind the debate stage, a live feed appeared, grainy, from what looked like a private office filled with dusty books and chalkboard walls. There he was,
Dr. Hayes.
older now, but sharp-eyed, wearing a brown cardigan and horn-rimmed glasses, his hair grayed and cut close, his face lined with time and struggle.
He didn't smile.
He studied. Omari stared at the screen, his breath shallow. The voice that had just dismantled the accusation against him was now looking directly into the camera, addressing the world. I stayed silent for a long time, Dr. Hayes said. Too long. I watched institutions crush brilliance because it came in the wrong skin. I saw how they chewed up thinkers who looked like me, who thought like me too fast, too sharp, too confident. I was one of them. Whitaker, seated across from Omari, stiffened in his chair. I was told I was too bold, too eager to disrupt, not collaborative enough. Sound familiar? He turned to the host, Ross. This isn't new, you know that. But what is new is that they didn't get to Omari in time. He showed the world before they could shut the door. Omari blinked. He wasn't used to being spoken about like that. Not in public. Not with admiration. Not with kinship. Dr. Hayes leaned in closer to the screen, voice quieter now, but weightier. I didn't coach him. I didn't even know who he was until a student sent me the video. But when I watched it, I saw something I hadn't seen in 30 years. Someone who thinks in dimensions most people can't even see. Someone who doesn't follow equations. He feels them. That's not something you teach. That's something you carry. Ross tried to cut in, but Dr. Hayes continued, unbothered. And here's the truth no one wants to say. If Omari looked different, if he came from a prep school and wore a legacy pin on his lapel, they would have given him the keys to the department. Instead, they tried to accuse him of theft, because they couldn't imagine that brilliance could come in his form. But I could, because I lived it. The feed paused for a moment, glitching slightly. But when it returned, Dr. Hayes was holding up something to the camera, a faded document with yellowed edges and faint math notations scrawled in the margins. This was my last unpublished proof, he said. I never got it right. I walked away before I could. But Omari did it. In that classroom. In real time. No assistance. No plagiarism. Just pure mind. The studio was silent again. Even the moderator had nothing left to ask. This wasn't a panel anymore. This was testimony. Public, undeniable, and irreversible. Dr. Hayes leaned back in his chair, exhaling. The question isn't whether Omari is a genius, he said. It's whether the system that tried to erase him can survive what comes next. Then, just as the network was about to close the feed, Dr. Hayes spoke again, this time directly to Omari. Omari, he said, voice suddenly softer. I've been working on something for years. Something that's never been solved. I shelved it after I left academia. It's too big for one man. Omari sat forward, blinking. I want you to co-author it with me, Hayes said. We'll publish together. You've already proven you can see what others miss. Let's make them see it in writing. Gasps rippled through the audience. Even Ross seemed stunned. Omari didn't move. He didn't speak. His mind ran through 1,000 thoughts. Gratitude, disbelief, purpose, fear, all tangled. But one thing stood out above the rest. They tried to take everything from him. And now he was being offered something greater than vindication. He was being offered legacy. Whitaker's face cracked. The smug composure he'd worn like armor now buckled under the weight of this moment. He stood abruptly. "I won't be a part of this charade," he said, voice shaking slightly. "This is not a debate, it's a trial. A public spectacle built on resentment." Ross tried to calm him. "Professor Whitaker, we're still live." "I don't care," Whitaker snapped, his mask finally slipping. "He didn't earn this. He performed well, but performance isn't mastery. And that man," he pointed toward the screen, "abandoned this field years ago. He has no standing." The audience murmured. Ross, sensing the moment shifting permanently, turned back to Omari. "Do you want to respond?" Omari turned to face the camera directly.
"I don't need to respond to him," he said. "I've already proven what I can do."
He paused. "But I will say this. I was never asking for approval. I was asking for accuracy. And if that makes me threatening, then maybe the threat wasn't me. It was the lie you've been telling yourselves about who gets to be brilliant." Gasps again. Then silence. Then applause. It started slow, just one or two people, but it built, rising like a wave, until the entire audience stood. A standing ovation. Not just for Omari, but for every student who'd ever been told they didn't belong. Omari remained seated. He wasn't smiling. He was processing. This wasn't the end. But for the first time, he had space to imagine what came next. As the cameras cut and producers rushed the stage, a reporter approached Omari backstage, holding up a phone. "You need to see this," she said. "Your mom just posted something. It's gone viral." Omari took the phone and what he saw made his breath catch. The clip of Dr. Ellison Hayes offering Omari a co-authorship had racked up 18 million views within 20. But it was what happened after the cameras cut that shifted the country. In a single night, Omari Dorsey went from being a target of institutional gaslighting to a symbol of defiant black genius. Not by force, not by politics, but by doing something the system had never expected him to do: survive. He didn't just endure the system. He cracked it open. Media outlets lined up with interview requests. New York Times, NPR, Scientific American, The Atlantic, CNN. They all wanted the headline. From accused to acclaimed. The math genius who refused to back down. But Omari didn't give them the sound bites they wanted. He wasn't there for their redemption arc. He was still too busy unpacking what it meant to almost lose everything for being right. Langston University issued a formal statement on a Wednesday morning, sterile, calculated, and clearly run through 5 lawyers. "We regret any harm caused by miscommunication and reiterate our commitment to fostering an inclusive academic environment. Professor Ronald Whitaker has voluntarily stepped down to pursue other professional interests." It was a lie. Of course. Whitaker hadn't stepped down. He'd been removed. Quietly. Abruptly. Not because of principle, but because of pressure. Funding had been threatened. Enrollment was dropping. Black alumni had pulled together a petition signed by 23,000 people demanding accountability. Parents of incoming students began to ask whether Langston was a place where their children could thrive, or only survive. The board folded. Whitaker was gone. No farewell. No legacy plaque. Not even a department email. Just silent. Just like he'd given Omari in class after that first solution on the board. And yet Omari didn't feel triumphant. He felt tired. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Jasmine became a public voice too, finally reclaiming the story she had once been forced to bury. She and Omari co-wrote an op-ed titled "Brilliance Isn't Always Believed," that spread through academic circles like a match across dry grass. It forced conversations. Not just about math, but about what happens when excellence comes from the margins. About how quickly a system built to protect knowledge can weaponize that same structure to suppress the ones who carry it. Omari was offered awards, panels, honorary mentions. A university in Canada offered him a full-ride graduate scholarship, a fellowship, a job, but he hesitated. Because while the world now saw him as a prodigy, he couldn't shake the knowledge that just weeks ago, they were ready to let him drown. He stood in front of the mirror one night, staring at his reflection, remembering what it felt like to be called a fraud, to be investigated, to have his laptop taken, his name dragged. He thought about every gifted student who never made it to their own redemption story. The ones who gave up, broke down, disappeared. What if Jasmine hadn't found him in time? What if the envelope with Whitaker's thesis had never arrived? What if the recording never leaked? He would have been a footnote, a cautionary tale, another what could have been. He hadn't just been doubted, he had been nearly deleted. The award ceremony was held on a crisp fall evening. The university, under immense pressure, had decided to honor Omari with the newly created Langston Medal of Academic Courage, a move clearly crafted to save face. They invited the press, rebranded the event. But Omari didn't show up to be paraded. He showed up because of one reason: his mother. Latrice Dorsey had worked 2 jobs for most of her life. She didn't know calculus, but she knew what it meant to fight for something no one else believed in. She arrived in a simple blue dress, her hands clasped tightly as she watched her son take the stage to a standing ovation. But the applause didn't move Omari. It was what happened after that did. The university president handed him the medal. Cameras flashed. Speeches were made. Then, as the crowd began to shift toward the reception, Omari stepped back to the mic. "Before we go," he said, voice low but clear, "I want to invite someone up. Someone who saw this long before anyone else did." He looked toward the front row. "Mom?" The room turned. Latrice stood slowly, eyes wide. She hadn't prepared anything. Didn't expect this. She approached the stage, one cautious step at a time, then took the mic with trembling hands. I'm not a speaker," she began. "And I'm not a scientist, or a professor." She looked at her son. "I'm just a mother." She paused. "My boy, he's always been different. Quiet. Deep. He used to sit on the floor and draw numbers in chalk before he could write his name. And I'll be honest with y'all, there were days I didn't understand him. I just prayed I could protect him." Her voice trembled. "And I remember one night. He was 12. Had just come home from school. Some kid had told him, 'You're not smart. You're just lucky.' And he sat at the kitchen table, staring at his notebook, and he said to me," she paused, tears brimming. "He said, 'Ma, they don't see me now, but one day they won't be able to ignore me.'" The room was silent. He wasn't angry when he said it. He was certain. Latrice looked out across the crowd. "I almost pulled him out of that school. I almost told him to stop trying so hard. Because I was scared. Scared they'd break him." She turned back to her son. "But I'm glad I didn't. I'm glad I let him be more." The audience stood, not just in applause, but in recognition. Not of Omari alone, but of what it means to fight for someone's brilliance, when the world calls it arrogance. Latrice stepped back. Omari embraced her tightly. They didn't need to say anything. The image of them, mother and son, standing on a stage that had once tried to bury him, spread across the internet within minutes. She believed first, the mother behind the genius. A hug heard around the world. As the crowd slowly dispersed, a man in a gray suit approached Omari backstage and handed him a sealed envelope. "This just came from Princeton," he said. "They want to talk to you about something urgent." Omari opened it, and his eyes widened, not at the offer inside, but at the name signed at the bottom. A name he hadn't heard since he was a child. Long before the applause, long before the headlines and televised debates, there was a tiny 2-bedroom apartment on the south side of Atlanta. It was modest. Paint peeling in corners, a leaky kitchen faucet, a second-hand couch with stuffing poking from the seams, and in the far corner of a shared bedroom, Omari's corner, there was always a lamp on, even in the dead of night. That light had been Latrice Dorsey's comfort and her curse. Comfort because it meant her son was still awake, still reaching, still hungry. Curse because it meant he was still fighting. And she knew what the world did to boys like that. Black boys who wanted too much too fast. Boys who dared to outthink the very system that underestimated them. She sat on the edge of her bed now, fingers curled around a printed version of the Princeton letter he'd shown her just hours earlier. The seal, the signature, it was all real. And still her mind wandered back to that night. The one she never told him about. The night she almost pulled him out of school for good. Omari was 15. He'd come home with a bloody lip and a cracked phone screen. Said it was an accident in gym class. It wasn't. She knew it the moment he walked past her without looking up. The way he held his backpack to his chest, the tightness in his shoulders. The way he shut the door to his room and turned off the light. She knocked. He didn't answer. When she finally walked in, he was sitting on the floor, knees pulled to his chest, math textbook open but untouched. His eyes were red. Not from crying, but from trying not to. "What happened, baby?" she asked, kneeling beside him. He didn't lie this time. "They said I cheat. Said I make the white kids look bad. Said I talk like I think I'm better than them." Latrice's heart broke right there on that cheap linoleum floor. "I'll talk to the principal," she said. "We'll transfer schools. You don't have to go back there." Omari shook his head. It'll be the same. Anywhere. She opened her mouth to protest. But he kept going. They think smart is supposed to look a certain way, sound a certain way, and I don't fit, but I'm not gonna shrink to make them comfortable. His voice wavered. Just barely.
Then he whispered the words she never forgot.
They won't see me coming, Ma, but they'll never forget me. He said it like a promise, like prophecy, and in that moment, Latrice made her decision. She wouldn't pull him out. She'd push him forward, whatever it cost. Back in the present, the Princeton envelope sat on the coffee table. Omari had gone to bed. Finally, the weight of the ceremony and media storm finally crashing down on him. But Latrice stayed up, staring at that seal. She finally opened it again, reading the last paragraph aloud to herself. We would be honored to have Mr. Dorsey join our inaugural Black Theoretical Mathematics Fellowship, under the mentorship of Dr. Ellison Hayes, as a named contributor to future departmental research. She smiled. Not the wide, proud smile she wore for cameras, but the quiet, knowing one. The kind only a mother wears when a long-fought battle turns. But tucked behind the letter, she noticed something she hadn't seen earlier. A second page, handwritten. Not from Princeton, but from Dr. Hayes himself. Ms. Dorsey, he told me what you sacrificed, what you carried. I know what it's like to be a mother to genius, in a world that doesn't want it to bloom. You kept the light on. Now we'll make sure the world sees it. With deep respect, E. Hayes. Latrice folded the letter slowly. Her hands trembled. Because someone understood that behind every so-called prodigy was a mother stitching light into the dark, carrying her child's genius on tired shoulders. She looked at Omari's door, closed now, and she whispered, "They'll never forget you, baby. But I always saw you." The next morning, as Omari opened his email, he gasped. A second Ivy League institution had reached out, not with another offer, but with a question. Would you consider teaching? The email sat open on Omari's laptop for 2 days. An offer from a top Ivy League university, not just admission, but a prestigious research position, a 6-figure stipend, full autonomy, and global press. The subject line was gilded with flattery, reshaping theoretical mathematics, with you at the helm. Most people would have jumped. And for a few hours, Omari considered it. But then he thought about the hallway, outside the dean's office, where he had waited for hours with a folder of proof only to be accused of plagiarism. He thought about the silence in classrooms when his name was mentioned. He thought about Jasmine, and about his mother, who cleaned hospital rooms so he could chase numbers. And mostly he thought about the kids he had met since going viral. The ones who sent him messages like, "I didn't know we were allowed to be good at this. They told me I talk too fast, but now I think I just think faster than they can keep up. I showed your video to my math teacher." He cried. So instead of replying to Princeton, Omari wrote a different email to a historically black college in Georgia, where one of his late high school mentors used to teach. And a week later the headline broke. Omari Dorsey declines Ivy League, accepts tenure at HBCU, becomes youngest math professor in school history. The campus was smaller. No limestone buildings. No legacy halls, named after men who once enforced segregation. But it had warmth, energy, potential. And students who looked like Omari used to. Hungry, gifted, cautious. His classroom had no digital whiteboard, no fancy lecture stage. Just rows of scratched desks and a chalkboard so old it clung to the dust of past decades. And that was exactly how Omari wanted it. Because this time, he was the one holding the chalk. He began his first lecture in silence, just like Whitaker had, months ago. Except this time, there was no trap, no ego, no agenda. He simply wrote a problem on the board, one that looked almost impossible at first glance. Then he turned around and said, "Who wants to try?" The students hesitated, whispered. One hand went up, then another, then a third. Omari nodded, smiling. "Good," he said. "Now let me show you what I learned when they didn't want me to solve it." He walked them through not just the solution, but the mindset behind it. The doubts, the assumptions, the moments when the problem looked like failure, until it wasn't. He didn't teach them how to memorize. He taught them how to believe in what they saw, even when no one else did. Months passed. Omari's office became a haven. Students would stop by, not just with homework questions, but with bigger worries. What if I'm not actually smart? What if I don't belong in this department? What if they're right about me? Omari never rushed his answers. He didn't just tell them they belonged. He proved it. Some days he stayed until 9 p.m. reviewing proofs meticulously, side by side with his students. Other days he spent his lunch hour helping a nervous student rewrite their grad school application after being told their personal essay was too emotional. He built a mentorship circle called Unseen Geniuses, a community, a pipeline, a statement, and slowly, it started to spread. Other departments took notice. Other schools reached out. On weekends, he traveled to middle schools and low-income districts, talking to young minds about math like it was magic. Not just numbers, but language, power, legacy. He didn't want to be the exception. He wanted to be the start. One rainy afternoon, he walked into his lecture hall early. The room was empty, quiet. He stared at the board for a moment, lost in thought. Then he picked up the chalk and wrote a new problem. Something elegant, abstract, a challenge. He underlined one phrase at the top. Invent the pattern. Don't inherit it. A few students filtered in, chatting softly. Omari watched, then stepped back, arms folded, smiled, because he knew now. He didn't need validation from the places that tried to erase him. He had built something bigger than acceptance. He had built access. Later that semester, a journalist visited campus to profile him. They expected a prodigy with an ego. Instead, they found a professor casually munching peanut butter crackers across from a student who had just failed her midterm. The journalist asked one question before leaving. What would have happened if no one believed in you? Omari paused, looked at the camera, and said, then maybe I wouldn't be here. But someone did. My mom. And sometimes that's all it takes. One person, one moment, one hand that doesn't let go. The piece went viral. But Omari didn't check the views. He was too busy helping a first-year student who reminded him of himself. Quiet, overlooked, but brilliant. That night, Omari stayed late again. He sat at his desk, thumbing through letters from students he'd mentored. New thank you notes, proofs scribbled in the margins. One letter caught his eye. It was from a high schooler in Detroit. They told me I talk too fast, that I need to slow down in class. But then I watched your video, and I realized maybe I'm not too fast. Maybe I just think faster than they can keep up. I want to be like you. Omari folded the letter gently, emotion rising. Then he turned off the lights. And for the first time in years, he left the lamp off. As Omari exited the building, he glanced back at the chalkboard still glowing faintly in the hallway light. That same problem lingered in the dimness. He paused, then wondered aloud, what if every child like Omari had just one person who believed in them? If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or silenced just for being who you are, this story was for you. Because brilliance should never need permission to exist. Type yes if you believe every voice deserves to be heard. Subscribe if this broke your heart and opened your eyes.